Welcome to the brand religion modules. This short video will give you just a small introduction and a wrap up of the key brand religions, and tune in for the other videos if you want a more elaborated view on each of the brand religions. We started often with the question, do you think as a marketeer that your brand is still alive? Because just like zombies, you might think your brand is still alive, but in fact you are long dead, because you have been surpassed by the tsunami of changes that is characterizing this world, because it's becoming harder and harder for brands to stand out. Changings are going faster and faster, and you might have been outperformed by a competitor that didn't even exist a year back, and the expiration dates of brands is shortening, where you are being copied faster than ever, and the copies are even outperforming the originals. And the average lifespan of a brand was back in 1958 it was 61 years, and today it's less than 15 years. So brands are being challenged every day, and it's getting harder and harder for brands to stand out. And the question is there a way out? Well, of course there's a way out. There are many books that have been written capturing marketing theories, frameworks, and models on how to create future-proof brands. But what we see often with marketeers is that this abundance of visions and beliefs, it makes them confused and overwhelmed, and often resulting in two types of scenarios. First, you have the brands that kind of like paralyzed, not know what to do, and because they're not sure if they have to move to another branding strategy or not, they're just in fact just waiting for their own grave to be delved. And then you have the second type of brands that are switching around, panicking between frameworks and branding strategies as soon as someone new comes around in the company with a new vision and a new set of beliefs, and doing so they're just not focusing at all and flying around across everything. But the thing is, in this paradox of choice, focus is needed, and these marketing modules give marketeers this focus. It gives them a framework on what are the drivers to grow your brand, and what are the dimensions and the key performance indicators they should follow up or that measure brand success. And brands should follow what we call a religion, and we like to use the word religion because just like a religion, we see that many brands, they use these frameworks to guide them in everything they do and to follow this with great devotion. And this is in fact the definition of a religion, a pursuit or interest followed with great devotion. Not sure if you recognize this guy here, but this is Philip Kotler, and you could say that Philip Kotler is the father of modern marketing. If you have a background in marketing or did something in marketing, you must have come across his name together with Keller, but also David Aker. You could say that they form the classic religion, and just like the classics in food and in music, they're still very relevant today because we see that many brands still use their thinking today when crafting their marketing plans or their branding strategies. Here, a couple of books if you want to know more about the classic religion. And of course, the classic religion also comes with 5 key beliefs. I won't tap into them, but you can read into them what they are. But just as to refresh your mind, what is the classic religion about? Well, it's about thou shalt divide the market. So it's really about a targeted, so segmentation, targeting and positioning. So really about getting the segments and forgetting mass marketing here. It's really about target marketing. It's about creating a point of differentiation and standing out from other brands by creating a unique selling proposition, something that makes you stand out from your competitors. This could be anything, but also focusing on loyalty, because we all know the saying that according also to this religion, it costs 5 times less to retain a customer than to acquire a new one. Now, in this postmodern world, this Kotler-ian thinking has been challenged by many new frameworks that have been written and been growing, and we have looked at all these books out there and all these new theories and frameworks, and we know it's a simplification, but we found that apart from the classic religion, there are like 3 main schools of thought or streams of thinking that capture the big marketing frameworks or beliefs that are so, and that's the penetration religion, the influencer religion, and the relationship religion. And this slide kind of wraps up what are the key differences between these 4 religions. So the classic religion talks about target marketing, so STP, segmentation, targeting, positioning. Penetration religion is all about mass marketing, while conversation or influencer religion is about word of mouth marketing, and then the relationship religion, it's about relationship marketing. Classic religion is push and pull, while penetration religion is really push, creating repeat, creating memory structures, and also putting your product out there, so mental and physical availability. Influence religion is really push and pull, creating that conversations where you give some and you take some, and relationship marketing is really pull, where you seduce them and pull them in. Then the classic religion is really brand knowledge and equity based. Penetration religion is trigger based, again the distinctive assets. Influencer religion is of course influencer based, and then the relationship religion is emotions based. Emotions are at the core. Classic religion says that retention is cheaper than acquisition. Penetration religion says that acquisition is the sole path to growth. The influencer religion says that it's about creating a ripple effect and that retention leads to acquisition. Those influencers will help you gain the mass. And then the relationship religion, it says that retention is a long-term investment. And then lastly, the classic religion, it's all about differentiation. The penetration religion, it's about distinctiveness and penetration. Influence religion, it's all about conversations being the sole path to growth or being the currency. And in the relationship religion, identification is the key metric there. So this kind of wraps up the 4 religions. Tune in for the other videos to dive into each and one of the other brand religions, and read the paper if you want more info or details. So let's dive into the first brand religion, the penetration religion. The penetration religion is a very recent school of thought, and it's been inspired by Baron Sharp. Baron Sharp is a marketing professor at the University of South Australia, and in 2010 he wrote How Brands Grow. And How Brands Grow is a book that is actually looking at patterns in behavioral and purchase data and challenges the traditional Kotler-ian or the classic religion. And he found some remarkable, that he calls marketing laws, or at least patterns of data. Now in 2015 he wrote a sequel because his first book was mainly focusing on FMCG and CPG brands, and the second book also covers consumer services, but also luxury brands and so on. So what are the 5 key beliefs when looking at the penetration religion? The first one is penetration is thy sole path to growth. So basically within this religion, penetration is core, is king. It's all about penetration. What defines big brands? Well, basically big brands, they have larger customer bases. And this is quite logical because the more customers you have, more buyers, it equals more sales. So according to this religion, the key way to grow your brand is to grow the size of your customer base. And this is in contrast with the classic religion or the Kotler-ian thinking, which says that growth strategies can come from 2 ways. It can come from either growing the number of customers, so having more people buying your product, but also from having your existing customers buying more frequently. And this is something, the last item is something that Byron Sharp says is not true, because he says that bigger brands, they mainly differ in the size of their customer base. They have more people buying their product, and that buying frequency is not influencing the size of your brand at all. And this is also demonstrated in this example right here, where you can see a lineup of toothpaste brands in China. And as you can see, they're lined up based on their market share. So Crest having a market share of 19% and Bamboo being the smallest brand in the list of 2%. Now, if you look at the penetration numbers, it's quite linearly correlated with market share. So Crest having a penetration of 57%, and Bamboo having one of 9%. However, if you look at the average purchase frequency, overall people buy toothpaste 2.4 times a year. And as you can see, it doesn't vary a lot across brands, because the largest brand, Crest, people buy it 2.8 times a year, while Bamboo is only bought 2 times a year on average. So this brings us to a very important concept within this religion, and it's called the concept of double jeopardy. Basically, that bigger brands, they not only have more people buying the products, but those people also buy, although it doesn't vary dramatically, but they buy somewhat more frequently. So smaller brands, basically, they get hit twice. It's the curse of being small. So penetration is king. So how do you get an increased size of your customer base? And this brings us to the second belief, or the second commandment. Retention is an illusion. So retention is an illusion, and it's all about acquiring customers. And this is in contrast with the classic religion. And you might all know the saying that it costs 5 times less to retain a customer than to acquire a new one. Well, according to Byron Sharp, this is just a myth, because he says that defiction, so customer defiction, is outside of a brand's control, because every brand loses customers, and the amount of customers you lose depends on the amount of customers you have. Bigger brands, they lose more customers. However, the amount of customers you will lose will be proportionally less to your customer base. And so he says that even big brands, call brands, they all lose customers, and that 100% loyalty or a strategy focusing on retention is just a myth or an illusion and is not sustainable. Let's look at some examples. Think of Apple, which is a big cult brand. What do you think is the retention rate of a brand like Apple? Meaning, what is the percentage of customers rebuying Apple after they bought it previously? And this is only 55%. Similarly, for a cult brand as Harley-Davidson, where it's only at 33%. And if you look at an average FMCG brand in a typical year, the loyalty rate will be around 14%. So this brings us to a very important point here, is that loyalty in its pure form does not exist. People are not loyal. We are promiscuous loyal, meaning that we're flirting around between rival brands according to availability, and that we have this set of brands that we choose from and that we switch from. Of course, bigger brands will have more people buying them, and so these people buy it also more frequently, and they will also end up being slightly more loyal. So loyalty also as a concept, there's a double jeopardy here, that bigger brands will have more customers and those people will also be somewhat more loyal. But loyalty in its pure form does not exist. An example is Coca-Cola. 72% of Coca-Cola buyers also buys Pepsi, and if you think about it, there are only a few exceptions of people who will not buy Pepsi or Coca-Cola if one of the others is not available. So loyalty in its pure form does not exist, and this is again in contrast with the classic religion. Now, how do you get these customers? How do you acquire a customer? What is the strategy that you should focus on as a brand? And this brings us to the third belief. Thou shalt treat all thy buyers as equal. Now, if you look at the typical customer base of any brand, and this can go beyond the FMCG industry, what you will see is a chart like this. You will have a typical skewed distribution where you have a few heavy buyers, but the big mass or the bulk are light buyers or very light buyers. Now, what Baron Sharp or this religion says is that brands should focus on the mass. So it's all about mass marketing, and that you should not look at only a segment or a targeted segment of your customer base. And he says it's very important to focus on those light buyers, because often if you look at branding strategies, you will tend to focus on your medium or your on your heavy buyers. But actually focusing on your light buyers is a very lucrative strategy, because by focusing on your light buyers, you will also get the attention of your heavy buyers and of your medium buyers, because they will obviously see your message as they know your brand. And doing so, you will turn non-buyers into light buyers into medium buyers, and heavy buyers into even more heavy buyers. And so it's all about mass marketing here, and one should in fact forget target marketing. Now, a targeted approach is not only wrong, but it can also be dangerous. And this is something that smart cars also encountered. The smart car was a car that the brand designed for the young urbans who lived in a city and wanted a funky car to drive around it and easy to park. Now, what they saw that instead of the young urban people, the youngsters buying the brand, it was in fact the older generation that would buy the brand. This because youngsters felt that the car was too expensive, and then on the other hand, the older generations, they felt that this was a small and safe car they could trust. So all their communication, and they clearly got it wrong who their audience was. And so by focusing on a targeted approach, you can actually target the wrong audience, and it can also end up being dangerous. Now, what should you focus on your communication? And this brings us to the fourth principle or commandment, and it's that thou shalt repeat, repeat, repeat. So according to Baron Sharp, differentiation is just a myth. It doesn't exist, and brands should focus on creating brand distinctiveness by building and emphasizing and repeating memory structures. And this brings us to the famous brand distinctive assets. And these are assets that trigger the brand when being heard or seen. And these can be oral, visual, but also verbal cues that when consumer encounter them, they think of the brand and in a certain buying situation. So it's about in all your communication, you should create, sustain, and repeat those brand distinctive assets to in the end create brand salience or brand distinctiveness, or as Baron Sharp calls it, mental availability. The probability that consumer will think of your brand, will recognize your brand in a certain buying situation. And a brand that really succeeds well in this is the famous McDonald's logo, the golden arch. And just have a look at this video. It's an old video, an old advertisement of McDonald's back in 1997, I think, but it clearly demonstrates the power of the golden arch. And in fact, the golden arch is a more recognized symbol than the Christian cross, and research in the US even showed that toddlers recognize the McDonald's logo even before they recognize their own name. Not sure if that's a good thing, but it shows how powerful that logo actually is. So measuring distinctive assets, we do this using an implicit measurements tool. So it's not only focusing on mental availability, but a second concept in this growth strategy, according to this religion, is focusing on building physical availability. And this brings us to the fifth and last commandment, thou shalt be everywhere. And physical availability is the concept of being as easily as purchasable as possible by as many consumers as possible in as many buying situations as possible. And a brand that succeeds very well in this, or succeeded very well in this, is, I think, Coca-Cola. No matter where you go, whether you're doing a hike in a desert or you're being in a fancy hotel in London, Coca-Cola is there, and it tastes the same, it looks the same, it is there. And this was also the brand's B-hack back in the days, where they wanted to put Coca-Cola within arm's reach of desire. Whenever you think of Coca-Cola or felt like having a Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola needed to be there. And this is also something that an NGO in Tanzania found out, because they had troubles getting the medicines to the people there. And what they saw is, to their surprise, that even though they struggled to get everything there and the basic needs and healthcare there, is that Coca-Cola was there and that it was available in these most remote villages. And so what they did is they teamed up with the Coca-Cola distribution system to get the medicines to the people. So this brings us to the wrap up of the penetration religion with our 5 commandments or 5 beliefs. So the first one was that penetration is a sole path to growth. So it's all about penetration, obviously. Second one is retention is an illusion. So it's a strategy focusing on customer acquisition. Third one is thou shalt treat all thy buyers as equal. It's really about mass marketing here. Thou shalt repeat, repeat, repeat. It's a trigger-based distinctive assets being key here, and thou shalt be everywhere. It's really a push marketing effort where you focus on physical availability. Welcome to the brand religion module on the influencer religion. So the influencer religion, a couple of books that tap into this framework, or a branding framework, as you could say, is Contagious from Jonah Berger, The Dragonfly Effect from Jennifer Aaker, which, just as a side note, Jennifer Aaker is the daughter of David Aaker from the classic religion. And then we also have The Conversation Company. Again, we have 5 commandments or 5 beliefs that we will just quickly run through to give you an overview of the influencer religion. Let's start with the first belief. Conversations are the sole path to growth. So really, within this religion, conversations are the currency. And the believers of this religion, they emphasize that traditional media is dying, that we're watching less and less traditional television. And this does not mean that we're consuming less media. No, in fact, we're moving towards other formats, just like on-demand, Netflix, but also YouTube. And that traditional above-the-line mass marketing efforts are in fact useless according to this religion. Now, if you also think about it, we are bombarded with brand and advertising messages. And this is also what is emphasized within this religion, that on a day, the average consumer gets around 4,000 to 10,000 brand and advertising messages, and only a very, very small set of these messages are being absorbed. And it's conversations, in fact, that get through the clutter, because conversations are perceived as more reliable. And this is also what we found a few years back in one of our research projects, is that conversations or recommendations from peers are perceived as 4 times more reliable than messages coming from companies. So not only is the media landscape changing, it's about now everyone is becoming a marketeer, and a very powerful one, because people can say what they want, when they want, about any brand they want. And literally, conversations can make or break brands. And one of the famous examples, it's a very old school example, it's kryptonite. I'm just gonna tap into it very shortly because you must be aware of the story. If not, look at the paper, it's also written out there. But kryptonite is a brand of a bike lock, and it was supposedly this unbreakable anti-theft bike lock. If you would have that lock, nobody could steal your bike. But the story goes, what happens, this guy goes to a party, comes back, of course he loses his key, and of course he cannot open his bike. So he looks into his pockets on what he can find to open the lock, and he tries with this big pen, and surprise, surprise, the lock opens. So he posts this experience on this bike forum, the story gets picked up. People are retrying it, copying it, and putting it on YouTube. It gets a big buzz. The company sees this, assures nothing is going wrong. Of course, this only emphasizes the story and brings it, increases it in value. Traditional media picks up the story, and in the end, of course, the company could not had to recognize its mistake, and of course, the damage, not thinking about the financial damage, but also the brand damage were huge. But also this is a very recent example of Ariad, a pharmaceutical company, which announced some price increase of their leukemia drug. And so Bernie Sanders picked up the story, tweeted about it, and this tweet caused the stock price of the company to drop with 15%. So conversations are really making and breaking brands. And here, this brings us to the second principle, that it's all about marketing through people and not to people. So influencer marketing is key here. It's about selecting those few consumers, those influencers who can visualize your product and bring it in the spotlight, and can help create that, spread the word, and create a ripple effect. So it's not about mass marketing and focusing on the masses here. It's about focusing on those select few and creating, this could be niche bloggers, vloggers, and creating a ripple effect to help you spread the word. This is something that also Universal Studios did when they launched, again, it's an older example, but it's a very good example, but when they launched the Harry Potter theme park, what they did, of course, Universal Studios had the budgets to put this above the line, a media campaign, but what they did is they invited 7 Harry Potter fans, ultimate bloggers, to this midnight webcast, which was held from Dumbledore's office. And these 7 people, they got this unique pre-experience where they got the ins and the outs of this unique opening of the theme park. Now, those 7 people got really excited, and of course they started blogging and spreading the word, and ultimately those 7 people reached, within 24 hours, 350 million people, really blasting it out and gaining a lot of reach. So bloggers can be your influencers, and the good thing about bloggers is that they can help you reach a very niche consumer base, because they can help you also reach specific demographics which you cannot reach through traditional above the line mass media. But the same goes with vloggers. They're video counterparts. These are the reality stars of today. What once started as just a hobby behind their webcam in their room is now becoming, for many of them, a very lucrative business. And this also for Ryan. I don't know if you know Ryan, but Ryan is a 6-year-old kid who, just like any kid, plays with toys, and the only difference is that he does this in front of a webcam in his room. And Ryan has more than 5 million followers or subscribers on his YouTube channel, and he has more than 8 billion views. And Ryan's net worth is estimated around $6.5 million. So Ryan is a very important influencer for many toy manufacturers and toy brands, because he has so many subscribers tuning in and looking for Ryan's advice and feedback on the toys. So It's about finding your influencers and creating and having them create that ripple effect for you. And this brings us to the third commandment, or the third belief, is that all that activations should be the start of a conversation. So everything that you do as a brand should be the start of a conversation, and you need to keep the conversation going. And in fact, a professor of the University of Copenhagen showed that the conversation bubble, in fact, follows the same pattern of a financial bubble, where you have this kickoff phase, then you have a phase of influencers picking the story up, then there's a mainstream high peak where the story gets picked up by the mass media, but also by other consumers, and then you have a drop where the story dies out or dries out, as you could say. Now, when it comes to conversation management, it's really important not only to identify your influencers, but also to keep the conversation going. So it's really important to understand what are the drivers for conversations, what makes people talk about your brand. And this is something we also did with TUI, where we wanted to understand what makes people talk about TUI and recommend TUI from the moment they're thinking about booking a trip, the moment they book their trip, being on a trip, but also the afterlife, thinking back of their great holiday. So all your conversations should, all your activations should be the start of a conversation. But when it comes with conversations, it's not about conversations for the sake of conversations. Your conversations should have a purpose, or like John Berger puts it, your conversations should be contagious. And he found that contagious conversations, they are steps. And STEPS is an acronym for, the S stands for social currency. So people who share your story or talking about your brand, they should feel somehow a bit remarkable, special, exclusive, unique. Then there should also be a trigger, meaning that they're good conversations, they're linked to a context or an occasion that is also linked to your brand, so that when that occasion or that moment occurs, that automatically the conversation gets going then as well. The E stands for emotions. When we care, we share. The P stands for public. It should be as easy as copyable as possible, meaning that people should be able to take it, make it their own, copy it, and take it further, because monkey sees, monkey does. Then it also should have some practical value. It should also be news that you can use, something that you can take forward. And then the last S stands for storytelling. Your brand or product should be wrapped into a story, and by doing so, it will take the conversation further and it will make it more contagious. And a brand that succeeded very well in this is Blendtec. I don't know if you've heard of Blendtec, but Blendtec is a blender company, and maybe you should just look it up yourself. On YouTube, just type Will It Blend, and Will It Blend is a series of movies from that company Blendtec. Now, what are those movies? Well, in fact, on those movies you will see the CEO putting any random object in a blender and say, will it blend? And I can assure you it will blend. Now, how does the story go? So this is our second S from the STEPS acronym, is that there was this marketing guy just starting in the office, and he walked into the office and he saw sawdust on the floor, and then he asked his new colleagues, what's this? Are you guys remodeling? Are you guys changing things here? Because I can see sawdust all over the place. And then one of his colleagues said, no, that's just the CEO who does what he does every day. He puts an object in a blender and makes it blend, and of course, what is the result? Some dust. And this brought, of course, the guy to an idea. He said, why don't we just film this and send this to our clients, or mail this to our mailing list or database of potential customers? And so that's what they did. The guy bought a lab coat, some crazy nerdy goggles, and he just asked the CEO to put them on and do what he always does. And this turned into this big viral thing, and still today, when the new iPhone comes out, I can assure you it will end up in the blender and it will blend. So it's really about creating that story and creating contagious content that is in line with your brand. And this brings us to the fifth and the last principle, where it's thou shalt aim for positive recommendations. The ultimate goal within this religion, or the ultimate KPI, is to have people recommend your brand and creating that ripple effect. So the KPI here is a net promoter score, the extent that people will recommend your brand to others, to family and friends. And so this being a key KPI here, and we have an example, very good example of a Sky team who takes this KPI further in everything they do. So this brings me to the wrap up of the influencer religion, where again we have 5 beliefs or 5 commandments. So the first one, conversations are thy sole path to grow. So it's really about word of mouth marketing here. The second one is thou shalt look for your disciples. It's influencer based, so influencer marketing. All thy activations should be the start of a conversation. So conversations are the currency here. Thou shalt create conversations with a purpose. It's really push and pull, where you not only push content, but you also take or you're not only being reactive, but it's really creating this push and pull cycle between you and your consumers and creating a two-way conversation flow. And thou shalt aim for positive recommendation, ultimately creating that ripple effect. So yes, relationship religion, a new module from the brand religion module. So relationship religion is some books that link to that. Branding or marketing framework is How Cool Brands Stay Hot, of course, but also Love Marks from Kevin Roberts, CEO from Saatchi & Saatchi, and Consumer Brand Relationships from Susan Fournier. Again, 5 beliefs or 5 commandments, as you could say. The first one is thou shalt put emotions at the core. So here it's all about emotions, and research showed that if you remove or damage the emotional side of your brains, you will not only lose the ability to laugh or to cry, but also to make decisions, because 95% or more of our decisions are taken implicitly, automatically by the so-called type 1 processes, and only less than 5% of our decisions are taken from the more rational side of our brains. So also when we make decisions, we do not say, what do I think about this, but rather, what do I feel about this? So it's important, if you want to have people take action, whether it's to vote or to buy a product, you need to appeal to their emotions. So emotions are really core here within this religion. And there's a lot of discussions on what that emotional spectrum contains and about what are the primary emotions, the secondary emotions. But Paul Ekman has recognized that there are 6 universal expressions, being happy, sad, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. And if you look at brands know that emotions are a way to connect with consumers, to really create and bond with consumers. And if you look at advertisements, we all know those examples of advertisements that make us laugh, that leave us with a very good feeling, but there are also brands that are tapping into the other side of the spectrum. And this here is an example of an ad tapping into the more sadder side of emotions.
Okay. Daddy is the sweetest daddy in the world. Daddy is the most handsome, the smartest, the most clever, the kindest. He is my my Superman. Daddy wants me to do well at school. Daddy is just great, but he lies. He lies about having a job. He lies about having money. He lies that he's not tired. He lies that he's not hungry. He lies that we have everything. He lies about his happiness. He lies because of me.
So emotions are key within this religion, and so they're also a very important metric when you want to assess and measure advertisement success or brand success. And the way we do this, there are many ways to do this, but also using an implicit tool, thinking about the fact that emotions are rather automatic, intuitive and implicit. We also use the implicit association tool for measuring this as well. So in this religion, it's all about creating this emotional connection with your consumer, an emotional bond with your consumer. And this brings us to the second commandment or second belief: thou shalt build a relationship with thy consumers. And research shows that people feel some kind of affinity with certain brands, and that the relationships that we have with brands, they are quite in line with the type of relationships that we can find in the interhuman space. And Susan Fournier, together with some other authors, they looked at what are the different relationship types that consumers have with brands. And they identified 15 types. And let me just demonstrate or show you 4 types of relationships that consumers have with brands. You have an exchange relationship where you, as a consumer, you get a straightforward benefit for a reasonable cost, nothing more, nothing less. The product does what it has to do, and you just pay what you have to pay. And a common example could be a brand like Colgate. You pay whatever, and Colgate gives you fresh bread and clean teeth, nothing more, nothing less. Then you have adversal relationship, is a brand that you refuse to buy or that you're actively against. This could be Microsoft for Apple lovers or the other way around, but a famous example is also Monsanto, now also being often in the media, but it's apparently also the world's most hated brand out there. Then a third example is a secret affair, a brand that you downplay or that you keep hidden and you don't want people to associate with you with that brand, but you like that brand, or you at least value that brand. For women, this could be a brand like Tampax or Always. And then you have a communal brand or communal relationship. It's a brand that you go out of your way for, that you have a strong desire to help and to take forward. And an example here could be Wegmans. I don't know if you know Wegmans, but Wegmans is a supermarket or a retailer in the US. And it's supposedly paradise on earth when it comes to supermarkets, because people write even love letters to the supermarket begging them to open a new store near to them, so that they don't have to make a 1 hour or 2 hour drive to the supermarket. So ultimately it's about building a relationship with your consumers. And how does relationship marketing start? Well, as a brand, you have to build a strong brand identity that consumers can identify with. And doing so, it starts with yourself as a brand. You need to know yourself as a brand, what you stand for, who you are, what makes you tick, and what makes you special. Because if you do not know that, how can you expect consumers to know why they should choose you? So once you know yourself as a brand, you need to also identify your type. What is your type of consumer that you want? Because for every brand, there is a consumer out there that goes out of the way for your brand, that wants you as a brand. And it's really important to identify that type of consumer and understand what are the social, emotional, and functional needs of those consumers, and match those needs with what you have to offer as a brand. And so brand identification is really key here. And with identification, we mean the extent in which the consumer personality overlaps with the brand personality. And research showed that brand identification does not only result in increased brand preference, but it also reinforces purchase behavior. So within this religion, the identification is truly key here. Now, in relationship marketing, it's not about a fling. It's not the short term, but what you want in the end is the ultimate goal should be the long term and not a one-shot purchase thing. It should be, the ultimate goal should be a long-lasting marriage. It should be true love and focusing on the long-term effort and really building a long-lasting relationship with your consumer. Because as Kevin Roberts puts it, love is loyalty beyond reason. If you remove a brand, people will look for a replacement. But if you remove a love brand, you will have a protest on your arms. And this is also a funny commercial or ad that that Burger King did when they said they were gonna remove the Whopper, which is, you could consider being a love brand, and they had somehow a protest on their hands.
This is a regular Burger King. Today, this Burger King is a Whopper free zone. Any customers come in here or go to the drive-thru and ask for a Whopper, they're unfortunately going to be met with a no. It's no longer on the menu. Welcome to the Whopper free Burger King.
I love the Whopper.
It's a great sandwich. It's a fulfilling sandwich.
That's what Burger King is, home of the Whopper.
Recently, we conducted an experiment in a Burger King. The following are the results of that experiment. The cameras are hidden, the customers are real, the reactions are authentic. This is Whopper Freakout.
What? That's your thing, though. The Whopper.
That's our thing, yes.
And it's gone.
And it's It's gone. Oh my god. Oh my god. They discontinued the Whopper.
Hi, yes.
Why is the Whopper like not even here anymore?
Well, unfortunately, corporation is not telling us why they're discontinuing the Whopper.
It's like ever since I was like 10, I've always came here and had the Whopper.
We're a level of 1 to 10. How pissed would you say you guys were when you heard?
I'm like a 10 right now. I'm a little heated right now.
We also had a member of our crew act as a reporter to capture people's candid reactions.
How did you feel when you heard the Whopper wasn't on the menu anymore?
I was livid, and you know, I just complained, gave the guy an earful.
What? We don't have the Whopper anymore. You don't have the Whopper? No. Like today or ever?
God, very good.
What was their thinking?
Well, from what I understand, they were too popular. Too popular. Sandwiches got too big for the menu.
Whoppers are yeah. Like, that's it. Like, you don't have the Whopper with cheese anymore? Seriously? Wow, can you believe that? Bizarre. All of them, not just you. All of them. Go on.
Unfortunately, we no longer have Whoppers.
You cannot be serious. Is this a joke? I want your manager at the window when I get there, please.
I think it's a huge mistake. I think it's the best burger nationwide.
The Burger King doesn't have the Whopper. They might as well change their name to Burger Queen.
Yeah. What are you going to put on the logo now? Yeah. Home of the whatever we got?
So in the end, we'd accomplished what we set out to prove, that once and for all, the Whopper is, as we thought, America's favorite. The next time you hear those words, just think back to the town and the day when the Whopper went away. Think back to Whopper Freakout.
And the ultimate expression of brand identification, you could say, is having people walking around with a tattoo on their arm. You probably all know the famous examples of people with a Harley tattoo on their arm, and having that community feeling around it. But also for a research agency, it could be that someone would be walking around with a tattoo on their arm. I don't know if you know who this is, you should know who this is, but Tim has a tattoo of the InSites logo on his leg. If you haven't seen it, you can always kindly ask him. So it's about building a long-term relationship, having that identification, and ultimately, just like with any relationship, love is hard work. You need to keep the spark alive. You need to keep on going, keep on listening to your consumers to keep the love in place, because if not, you will have a divorce on your hand. And it's just like in human relationships. And so you need to keep on listening what makes your consumer tick and keep the match and that identification in place. And a brand that did not succeed in this is Abercrombie & Fitch. Abercrombie & Fitch had a very clear positioning that was once successful, but they didn't understand that today's youth changed and that their very you could say harsh positioning is not in line with how today's youth sees themselves and how they see the world. A brand that did see this is Ox. Ox, if you think about previous Ox advertisements, they're all with guys with six packs being followed or chased by gorgeous women because they sprayed some deodorant, Axe deodorant on their arms. But now they understood that grooming and male grooming and that masculinity today is very different from the past. And they very well succeeded in this. We also have a community running with them with what they call the guys. They're not just consumers, no, they're the guys. And here you can see the result of one of their recent campaigns, which I think clearly proves the change and that Ox is doing to make their brand relevant again and to keep, in fact, the spark alive with their consumer base.
Come on, a six-pack? Who needs a six-pack when you got the nose? Or a nose when you got the suit? Now you don't need a suit when you got the moves. Or moves when you got the fire. Or fire when you rock those heels. And heels when you ride those wheels. Looks? Man, who needs looks when you got the books? Or books when you got some balls? And who needs all that when you get the door? When you got the dough, the brains, the touch, the that's right. Who needs some other thing when you got your thing? Now work on it.
So this brings me to the wrap up of the third or last religion, you could say, the relationship religion, where we said thou shalt put emotions at the core. So it's really emotion based here. The second commandment is that thou shalt build a relationship with your consumer. So obviously it's really about relationship marketing here. Thou shalt craft thy DNA. It's really about pulling them in and seducing your consumers. Thou shalt build to last. Build to last. So retention is something on the long run. So here it's really about loyalty, which is very much in contrast with the penetration religion. And then lastly, thou shalt work for thy love. It's really about identification and keeping that spark alive and keep that going.